I was 19 is when I had the onset of my symptoms. I don't know how else to describe it except for something like switched in my brain. Like I felt a physical shift. And from that point on, I started having thousands of intrusive thoughts and images every single day. And it got to the point where I wasn't sleeping because I didn't want to dream about those thoughts. I probably didn't enter REM sleep for years when I was struggling because I was so afraid to even go to sleep. I don't know if I can say this, but my psychiatrist at one point said we might need to prescribe like a low dose of an antipsychotic because it was pretty delusional at some points. I know that sometimes people say OCD is OCD, it's all the same. I will firmly say I don't believe that all content is the same. I think that pedophile obsessions, there's an added layer of shame and stigma that other kinds of obsessions, it's not present for. I will say I'm probably 97% better than I was, which is so miraculous. Like when I say I had millions of thoughts a day, like it was like a pair of headphones were glued to my head.
Hello and welcome once again to another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. I'm Patrick McGrath, the Chief Clinical Officer for NOCD. If you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions, check us out at nocd.com for more information. And if you like this podcast, you can subscribe to the NOCD YouTube channel. Today, I am happy to have a friend here. Not that I haven't had friends, but you and I are friends.
You hated every other guest.
I really, none compare to Alegra Kastens whatsoever. None. So thank you for joining today.
I'm so excited to be here.
And it's fun to be here in your hometown, well, at least for a few more months,
yes.
At least.
Yes.
And just to talk about not only OCD, but some of the more taboo aspects of OCD, which you have been very open about. And I heard you're writing about
I am.
too.
Yeah, I'm writing a memoir.
I cannot wait.
I'm super excited. The first draft is due November 1st. So.
Oh, well, they keep you on your toes then, don't they?
Yeah.
Yes. And will you record the audiobook of it yourself, do you believe?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, that'll be so soothing. I'll just have you in my ear. And
I love that.
if I'm not even with you, you're still with me.
I'll be with you, Patrick.
That's awesome. Well, for people who don't know you, can you tell them a little bit about your OCD story and how you got into going from a person with OCD to a person who's now treating OCD with OCD as well? And all
Absolutely. So how do I want to start this? Well, I guess when I was 19 is when I had the onset of my symptoms. And I was actually talking about this yesterday with someone at lunch. Like it was in a split second, everything changed for me.
Wow.
Like I had one thought. And then from that point on, I had 100 million thoughts every single day, which when I'm looking back now, I feel like it might've been Pan's Pandas or something, because I think
sounds something. Yeah.
Which at the time I just was like, not that is this normal, but when you have a sexual thought about a child, and that was my first thought, it's like, I didn't know what to think other than what the fuck. So I was standing in a clothing boutique that I was working at, and there was a little kid walking toward me. And I want to preface this by saying I love children, like more than anything.
Sure.
I've wanted to be a mom since I was 3 years old. Like that is the most important thing to me. And I had worked at daycare centers. I had been around kids all my life, babysitting. I'd never had a thought like this. But the kid was walking toward me, and all of a sudden I just heard in my brain, like, what if you had sex with that kid? And it is such an internal full body experience too, where I felt the dread, the panic, and it felt like, I don't know how else to describe it except for something like switched in my brain. Like I felt a physical shift. And from that point on, I started having thousands of intrusive thoughts and images every single day. But I didn't know it was an intrusive thought for probably 12 months into my suffering. Like I didn't even know there was a name for that. And so I spent a year undiagnosed, got to the point where I was going to die, basically. It was like, if I can't figure out what this is, I want to kill myself. But how am I supposed to figure out what this is when I can't go and tell someone I'm having sexual thoughts about kids, dogs, family members, like all of the worst parts.
Anything that moves or is alive.
I say that constantly. My brain would turn a tree into something sexual, a nail polish, a water, like literally everything. And then I was working in the PR industry at the time, and I was really good at masking my symptoms, which I think was a problem. I think it can be helpful because I climbed the PR ladder really quickly. But when all of your symptoms are internal, like my obsessions were internal. Again, I didn't have a name for them. My compulsions were internal. Nobody knew that I was suffering. So I started crying at work one day. I think my brain was like, what if you type in child pornography? Like the most fucking disturbing thought ever. And so I went outside, started crying. My friend saw me and she basically said, you need to see a therapist. She called her therapist, who then referred me to a therapist in his office. And I got diagnosed with OCD 15 months into that first thought.
What was it like to be told there's a name for this?
You know, I had Googled 3 months prior. So it took me 12 months to Google, why am I having these thoughts? Which sounds insane when we're in the age of like, you know, I think it was 2014 at the time. But I didn't want to Google it and have the internet say you're a pedophile when I knew that I wasn't a pedophile. So I Googled 3 months prior and OCD came up, but I didn't believe it. Like to me, I was like, why? I thought OCD was a disorder of sanitization and counting and checking, all of the things that I wasn't doing. So when I saw that on the internet, I thought there's no way. And then even when I got diagnosed, it helped to a certain extent, but then it was like, I'm still having sexual thoughts about children. Like, I don't know how much a diagnosis can help me, if that makes sense. It didn't rid me of any kind of shame or stigma.
So then you get into treatment for it.
Kind of. So, well, yeah. So this therapist didn't specialize in OCD treatment, but she told me that from the get-go.
Okay.
And I wanted to keep seeing her because it was my first time in therapy and I really liked her.
Yeah.
And then she said, see a psychiatrist. That was like a whole, I've actually never talked with, I had the weirdest psychiatrist. My first psychiatrist was a creep and he would ask me like, what are your specific thoughts? He knew I had OCD. He knew I had been diagnosed. And we would just stare at each other for the whole like 25 minutes of the session because he wouldn't treat me if I didn't tell him the exact sexual thoughts I was having, which I feel like is kind of odd for an older man, you know, maybe not, but Patrick's like, I don't know. And so that didn't work. Saw another psychiatrist. Yeah. Those meds didn't work. And then, oh God, it was probably 2 years into seeing her. She kind of drew the line and said, like, you have to see someone. You have to see an OCD specialist. Yeah. And I still didn't want to, believe it or not, because I was so afraid. But then when I saw someone at the OCD Center of Los Angeles, that was when like really everything changed for me. I think it was 22 at the time. Okay. So about 3 years in. Yeah.
And then you're introduced to evidence-based treatment for OCD.
Yes. Yes, which was so wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you do evidence-based treatment for OCD.
I do. Yeah, which I never thought that I wanted to. I knew at first there's no way I could treat OCD because I didn't want to pick up my clients' obsessions and compulsions.
Sure.
And I thought like I did have a very sticky brain. So even if I saw someone performing a compulsion, I would then think that I was going to start to do that compulsion. And then by nature, I kind of would. So I didn't want to do that. But then I was working in PR at the time and it just didn't feel meaningful to me. So I decided to go back to school to be a therapist and I was just going to do eating disorders. And then it turns out I had a passion for OCD treatment. Yeah.
Now, there is a link a lot of times with OCD and eating disorders. So definitely we'll have some discussions on that today. Yes. That'll be great. Do you find now that you can work with people without being triggered? It does help me because it's like I'm constantly using my tools. I'm constantly hearing all kinds of thoughts. So if anything, being an OCD therapist has helped my own symptoms. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And I honestly think clients always think they're going to come in and shock me with a thought that they've had. And I'm like, if you've thought it, I've definitely fucking thought it, you know? So I haven't ever really heard anything. I actually haven't ever heard something from a client that has triggered me more than my own brain has.
There are, unfortunately, in the field, still people who don't understand the pedophilic OCD, the taboo thoughts.
Which you should not be treating OCD, and I will flat out say that. You shouldn't.
Yeah.
You know?
I would agree. And I hope that someone who's a therapist who might not understand OCD will get to hear this and understand that there is an ego-dystonic or unwanted nature to these. Right. Can you describe that for you?
Totally. Yeah. So ego-dystonic essentially means that thoughts, feelings, behaviors are opposite to our values, our self-concept, our desires. And when I had this thought, it was so jarring to me, that first thought, because it was so ego-dystonic.
Yeah.
I know that I love kids. I have never been attracted to kids a day in my life. Like OCD is the most jarring experience because your brain is gaslighting you ultimately. So this was not a thought that I aligned with. This was not a fantasy of mine. It wasn't egosyntonic, which would mean in alignment with a person's self-concept. And that is what pedophilia is, even if the person doesn't like that they're having the thoughts.
Right.
And I say that because there are some pedophiles who know that they're pedophiles and don't like that they are a pedophile. People with OCD are doubting what they know, which is I'm not a pedophile and I don't like that I'm having these thoughts because of that. So there's a clear difference.
That's so important for any other thought too. In addition, it could be religious based, right? It could be morals,
harm, postpartum, anything.
Yeah.
Like OCD is an ego dystonic condition. The obsessions, the compulsions are opposite to a person's values, and they don't enjoy it, which I think is a huge misconception people have about OCD.
Yeah.
It's a love of cleaning. It's a love of organization. And even if someone does have sanitization rituals or just right obsessions and compulsions, they do not enjoy it.
Right. Yes. You must have a very clean house.
Right. I'm like, my house is a fucking mess and I'm worried that I'm a sexual predator. So that's my OCD.
Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah. I want to go back to what we talked about with the eating disorders and the OCD, because there is an underlying perfectionism feel between the two. Can I keep my look, my body perfect? Right. Can I do things perfect? And I think, well, and we know that ERP can be helpful for both in those situations. I'm wondering if you could discuss that link a little bit and what you've seen.
So what the studies show us is that if you are diagnosed with an eating disorder, you are more likely to be diagnosed with OCD than someone without an eating disorder, and vice versa. They can be very comorbid, and they can also present similarly. People with eating disorders also can have obsessions and compulsions, and sometimes it can be really hard to differentiate between, for clinicians who don't specialize, I should say, between what is an eating disorder and what is OCD. For me, because I was anorexic before the onset of my OCD, and I do think that played a role in my sudden onset. I think when you're not eating for a year, and if you're not getting enough nutrients, that impairs your cognitive functioning. And I think
your brain can't function.
No, and I used to blame myself. Like if I just weren't anorexic, maybe my OCD wouldn't have been so bad.
Right.
But I was starved. I was extremely sick. I didn't know I was sick because I think that eating disorders can be more egosyntonic than ego-dystonic.
Yes.
And so I think for me, the eating disorder contributed to the onset of my OCD. And they felt similar in the sense of there were these thoughts that I couldn't get out of my mind. Like when I was struggling with anorexia, I could not stop thinking about food and body. And I know that might sound ridiculous, but it took up every single second of my day. If I wasn't eating, it's, am I going to be eating? What does my body look like? And there were a lot of compulsive rituals too. I was spending all day ruminating about my body, restricting, compulsively exercising. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say this. Like I can always spot an anorexic at the gym, you know, because I was that person. I would stand outside of the gym at 5:30 and wait for it to open. And I would be there every single day. And sometimes OCD can have that too, where it's that compulsive ritual that you just feel like you have to do or else nothing is going to be okay.
I don't know about you, but I feel that way sometimes at places with OCD.
You can always tell. Not always. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, but I
sometimes
seen,
you know.
There's even been times that I've been touring other places, and I've pointed out to them, you should maybe do an evaluation on that person because I'm noticing things, and they're like, "What did you see?" And when I say to them, they're like, "We never even saw it, right?" But I think our training and
sometimes you just know
we have the sniff test on
right.
It, right?
But other times you don't, and I think that's what makes it so hard is when the obsessions and compulsions are mental, so many people can get missed, you know, like misdiagnosed or not even know that they're struggling with OCD.
Yeah. Was there ever a doubt for you that this was OCD, or were there points where you just thought, no, I really am a terrible, awful person?
I definitely think it got to that point, but not because I thought I was a pedophile. It was because I was having the thoughts.
Yeah.
So I think that OCD can show up differently for different people. Some people are really bought into what if I am?
Yeah.
Mine was more so I want to stop having these thoughts. Like I would have them rapid fire all day long, like the same thought just popping in over and over and over again. And then that to me felt like, well, if I'm having these thoughts, then I must be.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And yeah, it was almost delusional at one point. Like there were points when, I mean, I don't know if I can say this, but
Yeah.
my psychiatrist at one point said we might need to prescribe like a low dose of an antipsychotic because
Mhm.
I was pretty delusional at some points.
Yeah, and we know that OCD has from good to fair to low to near delusional insight
Sometimes I was
levels.
near,
Yeah.
like the shit that my brain would come up with, and I'd,
Mhm.
I'd believe it, and my therapist would be like, "Girl, like
Yeah.
what? Like
Yeah.
this is not true."
Now, let me throw something at you. Did you ever maybe tell yourself just not to think of it, or did it?
I fucking wish I tried. Imagine up until this point I had never thought of that.
Yeah,
No.
I know. Shocking, I know. But how many people maybe in your life would have said something like
You
that?
know, my mom
Yeah.
said that to me.
Yeah.
She said, and it wasn't, I really do think she was trying to help, but
Of
she
course,
said,
of course.
"Have you tried thinking a different thought?"
Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
said, "Bitch, all I'm doing is trying to think a different fucking thought." Okay? And then it's like the more you try not to, it's like don't.
Yeah.
And then boom, that thought is there.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring that up,
It
because
doesn't work.
it
Yeah.
it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And I say that also for people who are watching who don't have OCD but have a loved one in their life with OCD. As much as you think that advice might be helpful, it's not.
No, not at
Right.
all.
And I say that with no blame or
Yeah.
anything like that. I just want people to truly understand that is not going
No.
to change someone's mind.
And not only that, it actually might make their symptoms worse.
Yeah.
If they start to try and suppress or stop thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to bet there were then a lot of arguments with people about what, if they almost maybe get mad if you wouldn't take their advice, their quote unquote advice, and try it.
Interesting.
Did that ever happen?
You know, no, because I didn't really tell a lot
Ah,
of people
okay,
about
okay.
it. I was
Mhm.
like, I really was living a double life, which sounds
All right.
wild. Like I just had deja vu outside because like this same street when I was a publicist, I was pulling looks for New York Fashion Week for a client.
Uh-huh.
Like I just had this double life where I was struggling so bad internally,
Yeah.
but nobody saw that externally. And I was so ashamed of my symptoms that I didn't, like I would say I'm having scary thoughts, but people didn't know the extent of it for years into my suffering.
Mhm.
Yeah.
With being so open about them, which again, thank you and appreciate, and can't wait again to read the book, because I think it's going to be a tell-all. I have a feeling
Yeah,
gonna
there's a lot.
there's going to be some stuff in
Some
there.
that my editor is probably going to want to cut out, but fight for it to stay.
Yeah. But that subset of people with OCD, I really believe, do suffer so much because of that internalized, probably even beyond stigma, at times hatred of themselves.
Oh, I thought I was literally disgusting. I thought I was
Yeah.
the worst fucking person alive.
Yeah.
And I know that sometimes people say OCD is OCD. It's all the same. I will firmly say I don't believe that all content is the same. I know that OCD is OCD and that it can be hard for everyone. I think that pedophile obsessions, there's an added layer of shame and stigma that other kinds of obsessions, it's not present for. And I think that can impact the course of treatment. So I don't like when people say, oh, if you had, like, you would wish that you had pedophile obsessions if you had another one. I've never met a person with OCD that tells me that they wish that they had pedophile obsessions.
Yeah.
Like, no one says that. And if they do, it's because they don't understand what it's like to have them. But that layer of shame and stigma is so great. And then you can't tell anyone, because what if I tell someone and they call the police? What if I tell someone and they take my child away? I don't have a child, but if I did, what if I, there's that, like, I can go into a therapist's office and say, I'm afraid I'm going to get cancer from touching the doorknob. No fucking problem. I'm not going to go in and say, I'm afraid I'm like sexually attracted to children when you don't even know what's happening in your brain.
And we've sadly even seen people in our own community be shunned for even admitting those types of things. I mean, there's people who've done podcasts who've been trolled by this. Have you had anything like that happen where people have looked at you like, no, you really are pretty terrible?
Oh my God, all the time.
Yeah.
That's why I thought that podcast, it was horrible. Don't get me wrong. But the way that I look at that is, if that is hard for a person to experience who doesn't live with POCD, imagine what that's like for people with POCD to see that. Imagine what that's like for someone with POCD who does this work every single day that gets comments like that all the time. I don't give a shit at this point because it's like, I know who I am.
Yeah.
But that situation was really interesting to me because there are people who live with this every day who get shit like that, Yeah.
Or who just feel like they have to hide or to the point are suicidal.
Right. And part of which, I don't know if we should air this, but part of what worried me about that situation too was if a therapist is struggling with handling this, how am I as a client supposed to feel?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, if a therapist is saying, oh my gosh, I can't function because someone talked poorly about me talking about POCD,
Yeah.
what does that say about people who live with POCD?
Right.
You know?
Well, that's why it's important to have you here today.
Yes.
Because we have to put that out there, right?
Absolutely, for sure.
We can't allow people who don't understand something to rule everything.
No. And the irony of it is, like, people without OCD have these kinds of thoughts too.
Of
They
course.
just don't stick.
Yeah.
If you talk to most new parents, they've had a sexual thought while changing the baby's diaper.
Mhm.
You know, it's just that they don't stick for the people without OCD.
Yeah.
I had so many, when I did start to tell my friends, I had so many friends say things like, oh, I've had thoughts about like having sex with you or the dog or whatever. And like they didn't have OCD.
Yeah.
So that's interesting when people are like, I get all the time another white woman talking about fucking dogs or like, I'm like, okay. It's like, you've had a thought like that too, Karen. Okay.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, I have said very often to people that if you were writing a horror film, you would be paid $1 million for that thought.
Yes.
Right?
1,000,000%. Yeah.
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 But you have OCD and now you think you're the worst person in the entire world and you should probably be locked up to
Oh,
protect
for
the rest of the
sure.
world from you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, 100%. It's, yeah, I really did think I was the most disgusting person alive,
Yeah.
especially when your brain can go to the most gruesome places, and mine did.
Mhm.
You know, like I had sexual thoughts about like kids with cancer. Like truly, it could not have gotten worse.
Mhm.
You know, and it's like you start to think, what kind of fucked up person am I?
Yeah.
But I wasn't in control of that. It just started happening to me one day.
Right. And then even without knowing it, the more you don't want to think that, the
Oh my
worse
God.
they're going to get.
No, literally.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it got to the point where I wasn't sleeping because I didn't want to dream about those thoughts. I didn't want to have sex with a child in my dreams.
Mm.
So I would stay up during the night. I was so fucking tired, which obviously made my symptoms worse.
Yeah.
But
Lack of sleep, not helpful.
no, not at all. And
Mhm.
I didn't sleep for, I probably didn't enter REM sleep for years
Mhm.
when I was struggling because I was so afraid to even go to sleep. And then it was, I don't want to say my intrusive thoughts out loud while I'm asleep. Or like, there were just so many different, you know.
Well, sure. Then that affects relationships too. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
what if I'm sleeping
And then I say this out loud.
yes. Yeah, right. Yeah, or
Oh,
scream
no.
something. No one's staying overnight tonight. No,
it
it ain't happening.
impacted-
Yeah. Mhm.
It's like I was so high functioning, but it impacted every single aspect of my life. Like
Mhm.
dropped out of school. I couldn't read books. I couldn't watch TV shows. Couldn't sleep. Didn't want to drive. It was wild.
I'm going to say sounds miserable.
Oh, it was I think some people will say that I would do it all over again if I got this life. I would not fucking do that again, ever.
Mhm.
You know, like I don't know how I survived it. I really don't. It was 24/7.
Yeah.
And there's no escape. You can't just turn your brain off,
Right.
you know?
And unfortunately, no matter where you go, your brain is with you.
It's
wherever
all
you
the
go.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I would be driving, looping thoughts, afraid to go to sleep. Like I didn't want to drink because then what if I drink and I tell someone I'm having sexual thoughts or I do something?
Mhm.
Like I know some people drink or use substances to escape. That was a trigger for me.
Sure.
So there was no escape.
Right.
Just like I'm stuck in this all day long and I can't tell anyone.
Yeah, because that loss of inhibition could lead you to do something.
Oh,
that-
terrified. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Even though I will say I knew that it wasn't like I'm going to harm a child. It was more,
No.
I'm going to tell someone
Right.
I'm having these thoughts.
Right.
Which to me was like, I'm going to the grave with this shit. I'm never telling anyone this.
And so here's what's fascinating, and I'm hearing this, and tell me what you think. You at your core knew who you were.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
yeah.
But
No questions asked. Yeah.
that didn't matter to the doubt that OCD threw at you.
No. And that's what's so fucking frustrating.
Yeah.
And even when like I'll have a little lapse here and there, and then I'm back to like, oh my God, like, am I attracted to a baby? And
Mhm.
it's like, girl, we've been down this road 1,800 times. Like, I know that I'm not, but that knowing isn't enough sometimes when your brain is so noisy.
Yeah.
I think that when it gets really loud, the insight can drop, but it also just feels so real. And that's what's hard about it too, is like, you can know, of course I knew I wasn't a pedophile,
Yeah.
but it's also like when you're having all of these thoughts and then you're having the groinal responses, which that fucking killed me too.
Yeah.
It's like, it does feel real.
we'll get to groinals
Yeah.
because that's an important discussion. But thank you for just saying my favorite statement in the world, because I do webinars, and every Wednesday on my webinar, why does it feel so real?
Yeah, it is. I have a couple of theories. I feel, number one, I think it's the emotional part of the brain, and kind of like when I had a thought, it wasn't just a thought, it was a full body experience, like that surge of adrenaline and dread and panic. My stomach dropped.
Yep.
And usually when that happens and we are in the presence of something dangerous, like we want to fight or flight or free.
Yeah.
Freeze. Yes.
Mhm.
Flee. That's what I was looking for.
Fight, flight, or freeze.
Oh, but can't you flee too?
Well, flee is flight.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. I've been up
Also
since
a
6 a.m.
bassist for a band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yeah.
I've been up since 6 a.m. Okay. Wow, that was something. But then you're experiencing that same level of I'm in danger from a thought in your own mind.
Yeah.
So it does feel super real. And then they're so vivid. Like I would get images where I really thought I was experiencing schizophrenia. Like I would get a naked baby image, and I swear there was like a holy child in front of me. I was like seeing a naked baby in my mind.
Sure.
So then when it's that clear too, it's like, this has to be real.
Yeah.
You know? And I think it has something to do with the brain. And I know that some therapists disagree and will say it's you reasoned your way into OCD or what. I didn't just start fucking having sexual thoughts about dogs one day, babe.
No.
Like I wasn't like,
Yeah.
It just happened to me.
Yeah. I've always wondered that, just in the sense from the point we're born, we have really been taught that if there is a fight, flight, or freeze response, that it's
in
legit.
danger.
We're in danger.
Yeah.
And so OCD, and I'll personify it a bit here, is smart enough to know that and to be like, oh, I can get her to really believe it's true.
Yes.
Trigger that fight, flight, or freeze response.
Right. And it hijacks OCD hijacks your body.
Yeah.
And then also with sexual obsessions in particular, when you're thinking about something sexual, you're going to feel something down there.
Well, let's go to the groinal. Let's go there.
Groinal,
Mm-hmm.
because you're having a sexual thought. Your brain doesn't decipher this is a sexual thought that I like versus this is a sexual thought that I don't like. If your brain or body hears sex, you probably feel something down there.
Yeah.
And then you're feeling something down there, and then it's, oh, fuck, I must actually be aroused by this child or this dog or my fucking father. Literally gonna vomit. That's the groinal response.
Yeah.
You know?
For people who that's weird at first, I'll start just lecturing about lice.
So weird.
Right. Because it is weird for people.
Totally,
like to hear
be
that,
like,
right?
wait, you're
Wait.
having a sexual
Yeah.
thought about a kid and you're feeling something in your
right.
poussoir?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'll start lecturing about lice, and I'll just start talking about it. And then over the course of time,
Everyone
starts, they're scratching their head and they're doing all these things. And then I'll point it out, like, now all of you just started having feelings after we talked about something. Isn't that, the groinal. Yeah. Now you get it, right?
Right.
That, and of course, going back to what we said earlier, the more you hope not to have the feeling of the groinal.
Your poussoir is tingling.
Yeah.
It's going off.
Yeah.
And also when you're checking for it, and I think that's another piece of it, that mental checking as a compulsion. If you have a thought and then check to see if you're aroused, obviously you're feeling something because you're paying attention to a body part.
Yes.
So there's both, like where you can naturally have a groinal response or you can check and then induce one.
Because you can do that with somatic OCD, with blinking and breathing.
God, I had that the other day and I was like, relax, don't do this, Allegra.
Oh.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
It's not actually the worst. I literally was thinking, I'll do this all day long. Like if it's not OCD, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
You know?
Did I blink right? Oh, and then by the end of the day, you're doing these
I'm in
things.
session like,
right?
I'm like twitching.
Exactly.
My clients are like, are you okay?
Little somatic OCD going on. Apologies. Yeah. But, just the more we hope not to think of that thing.
Or to feel that thing. And yeah, it feels so damn real. And again, I do think it's the brain. I think that I know we don't know the exact cause of OCD, but for me, I think that a lot of it was physiological, and it feels like the realest thing in the world, which is, it sounds wild. If you're not someone with OCD, it's probably like, but don't you just know that you're not? It's not that simple when you have OCD.
We wish, right?
Or,
if only.
But like, it's not factual. Can't you just connect to logic? Well, not when the emotional part of your brain is misfiring.
Right.
That part overtakes the logic.
Right. And OCD uses a different logic than
Yes.
than non-OCD logic, because I say this all the time. OCD will always throw in a yeah, but what if that
Oh,
regular, quote unquote, regular logic doesn't have.
Totally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And your yeah, but what ifs sure as hell felt real to you.
Oh, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's really wild looking back. Yeah, but I always knew that I wasn't, though, and I think that that was the hardest part. It's like, how could I be having all of these thoughts and images when I know that I'm not?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I need to stop saying, you know, please cut that. I sound like an Ohioan, you know? You know?
Now that you're in the treatment
Mm-hmm.
world, right? How do you feel that bringing your personal story into the therapeutic experience plays a role in the work you do?
I think it really helps clients feel less alone. And I honestly get a lot of my clients from like the podcast that I do or my Instagram. And I think that's because I'm so open with my story that people feel like they can be comfortable sharing their own scary thoughts with me. So I think if anything, my lived experience has helped. And I do think it's harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder to understand OCD when you haven't lived it and you don't understand how damn real it feels.
Mhm.
So I think if anything, it has really helped my work with my clients. And I'm so passionate about treating OCD because of it.
I'm going to bet they appreciate that realistic experience as well.
Oh, for sure. And I think we have to pay attention to lived experience. I know that
Mhm.
science matters. I know that evidence-based treatment matters, but I also think someone going through it firsthand, there's so much that we can gain from that.
While I don't have OCD, I will say the greatest compliment I ever got was, I can't believe you don't have OCD because
That's
you
the best.
think like you
Yeah.
have OCD. And I was like, well, thank you
That's
very
the
much.
best compliment. Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
I love that.
Very much.
No, you get it for sure.
Yeah, and that's what's cool about therapists who are really in this, who have been trained in this, who do this, who live this, who are passionate about this. The fact that they will look at you and go, okay.
Like the things that my clients think are going to spook me.
Yeah.
Babe, they'll come in the next session and say, the thing I told you last week. And I'm like, huh? Like I don't even remember.
Right.
Not because it's not important, but it's
Yeah.
like so not what they think it is.
Right.
And I think it helps when I know where the OCD brain can go, so I can see my client's brain go to that place, if that makes sense.
100%.
It's like I can almost see it before they're able, like I watch it happening.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about a few things that I think are very important to really reinforce. Number one, getting a good amount of sleep.
Hard for people with OCD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially to turn off your brain, right? And
Right. I think for some people, it's like, I'm going to sleep because I don't want to have these thoughts. For me,
Right.
it was like, oh no. Uh-oh.
mm-hmm. Good nutrition.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because I think, again, especially when you were talking about with the eating disorder,
Yeah.
right? If we're not putting good things in, we may not be getting all the best things out.
Totally.
Mhm.
And if you're not eating enough, like it's really hard to use your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your brain will literally pull fats out of organs and
Yeah.
things in order to function, because your brain is going to do all it can to survive,
Yeah.
even at the expense of everything else.
Or the anxiety piece. I'll have clients say, oh, I don't eat until 1 p.m. And I've been so anxious. And I'm like, you're probably anxious in part because your blood sugar has dropped and your anxiety has spiked. So even just eating throughout the day can help with anxiety.
Yeah. What other things? I mean, you were boxing this morning, I
was
know.
boxing this
So
morning.
good exercise, I'm assuming. you
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's hard to say if exercise helped with my OCD because I relapsed in anorexia 2 years into.
feel? Yeah.
So then
it's an
I was
interesting
like-
combination there.
I was
yeah.
compulsively exercising, which didn't help.
Yeah.
So I
Mhm.
don't actually know if exercising would have helped all that much, but I can imagine endorphins,
Yeah.
chemicals, probably helpful.
Well, I think that plays a great line into this idea of good differential diagnosis too, right?
1,000,000%.
For some people, we might say great exercising would be very helpful. For others, we might
others-
say,
We can't do that. Yeah.
let's work in consultation with your provider for this as
Right.
well, to make sure that we have a good plan
Yeah.
to come together.
And it's so important to understand the differences between eating disorders and OCD
Yeah.
because they can look so similar. But if you're missing, like for instance, I I'm going to make this up, but I'm going to talk about a real client with making it up. There was a client who was afraid to eat apples because they thought if they were to eat apples, then they would go to hell. But then it became any red food. And then it became, so there was a ton of restriction and they ended up really medically impaired. It was OCD though. It wasn't an eating disorder.
Yeah.
It looks a lot like an eating disorder, but that was OCD. Whereas eating disorders are more about body, food. You really have to look at the function of the compulsion. So I'm not eating red because I think it's going to make me go to hell.
Yeah.
OCD.
Yeah. And the poor apple that it's just gotten labeled
I know,
as
this poor apple.
the fruit of hell. I mean, really, it's so unfortunate because a golden delicious can be very nice, or a good old Granny Smith or something. But yeah.
I love that.
But then that could be interesting too. Could I not eat apples or could it not be red apples, right? I mean, OCD would even think of distinctions like that.
1,000,000%.
So a green apple is okay, but a red apple is not.
Which makes no sense to people without OCD. But
Right.
with OCD,
Right.
in the magical thinking, it really feels like, no, I'm onto something.
Yeah. If I touch something and then you touch it and get sick, it's my fault.
Yeah.
But if you know I touched it and you touch it and you get
Yeah.
sick, totally your fault.
OCD makes no fucking sense.
Mhm.
But internally, it feels like it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. When you look back at you at that age, right? This coming about that day at the store and the result of that to where you are today, how do you describe the differences between the two?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, it's been 10 years too, which is so wild. I know people don't do OCD anniversaries, but I do just because I remember it.
I mean, I'd be happy to throw a party for you if you'd like.
It's been 10 years. I mean, I will say I'm probably 97% better than I was. I'm not 100%. I don't think anyone is, if that makes sense with OCD.
100%.
I'm 97% better, which is so miraculous. Like when I say I had millions of thoughts a day, like it was like a pair of fucking headphones were glued to my head. I don't have that now. And in some ways, my life is not because of the OCD, but I think my life panned out a lot better than I thought it would have. Again, not because of OCD, but I think just like the resilience that I've built and the passion I have for treating it and the friends that I've made along the way. For people who think their life is over when they get that OCD diagnosis, I honestly think 10 years ago, I never would have imagined being at this place and being this happy. And it's really interesting.
One thing I always want to ask people who have OCD, who are open about it, is how do you educate people who make that comment of, oh, well, I have a little OCD too. Yeah.
I pick and choose to be on, like online. If it's really important, like for instance, Dax Shepard, when he talked about OCD incorrectly on the podcast, like that is something I'll speak out about because there are millions of people who are listening and then might not know that they have OCD. If it's someone next to me on an airplane and I'm like, bitch, I'm fucking tired. I'm just like, I just let them, which is probably terrible. But I also think it's important for people to know, like, you don't have to change every single person's mind.
Yeah.
But if I am going to, then I just provide a couple of sentences of psychoeducation.
Yeah. And you took the Dax thing to the, You want to tell people a little bit about that? Yeah.
Oh, that was amazing. Yeah. So I posted a reel about it and then a bunch of like news outlets picked it up. And then I went on his podcast and it was really wonderful. He was totally open to correcting himself. And there were just things about OCD that he didn't know.
Yeah.
Which most of the time it comes from. It doesn't come from a place of, I want to be rude or I want to be an idiot. People genuinely don't understand OCD.
Right. Right.
It's unintentional a lot of the time.
And that's why we do the Get to Know OCD podcast. So
go.
people can work on getting to understand and know
that line
OCD.
Was not scripted. Yes.
5 cents.
There's my agent.
Ding, ding. Yeah, there's the agent. You worked that in nicely. Pay her under the table. Yeah. No, but I mean, that's why you do yours. That's why we do ours.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is the important thing.
Oh, yeah.
Only through education. And there's so many other things that have decades of education. Alcoholism has just decades of education ahead of us in the OCD community.
Oh, for sure. And I would even argue some themes of OCD. Like we see so much more about contamination OCD in the media than we do pedophile obsessions. So even within the OCD diagnosis, there are some themes that get so much more attention and the spotlight versus other themes.
Mhm.
And that's why I'm passionate about the taboo themes.
Yeah.
Like people will say sometimes on Instagram, like, you don't talk enough about contamination. And I'm like, the whole world does.
Yeah.
Not the whole world.
Right.
That's dramatic. But a lot of other people do. I want to be the voice specifically for taboo obsessions because we just don't have enough of that.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's not a lack of information on those very common ones.
Yeah.
It is a lack of information on the more taboo ones.
Absolutely.
And that's why I was excited to have you here today to make sure that we discuss those, because like we said, it isn't just what's going on in our head. It's what we experience in our bodies as well. And that groinal experience, and our friend Chrissy, who we've had out here, who talks about that. It's so important to start normalizing some of these things so that people are not sitting there alone and using substances or contemplating suicide or whatever it might be as a way to try to manage this experience, which is so devastating to the lives of the people who experience it at times.
Oh, for sure.
If people want to find you and your stuff, tell them all about it. Where will they go? Where can they see some of your great work?
So my social security,
972.
So at Alegra Kastens on Instagram, AlegraKastens.com, TikTok at Alegra Kastens, and then my book, Spring of 2026.
Spring of 2026.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Allegra, thank you.
Thank you. This
for
was
being
wonderful.
Here today. This was a joy and a very important topic.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. And thank all of you for joining us today on the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you like what you saw today, subscribe on the NOCD YouTube channel. And if you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions, go to NOCD.com to learn more. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.